Bitcoin again ran into a multi-year resistance where it found peaks in past cycles. Some say $150,000 is inevitable, while others say that a bearish collapse is coming. In this video, I will analyze what popular English-speaking crypto YouTubers think about it. Let's start with InvestAnswer. He attributes the recent price rollback to events in the US, where a court banned Trump's tariffs and then allowed them again after an appeal. The second reason: Bitcoin always rises before and falls after such high-profile conferences as the one held recently in Las Vegas. Another reason for the correction is the race of market makers for a trader who became famous on Twitter for turning $210 into 80 million, and then lost everything because market makers were hunting for him. Historically, he calls June, August, and especially September weak for Bitcoin. At the same time, July is a good month with an average yield of 10%, and the best months are October and November, with an average yield of up to 80%. At the same time, September is the worst month, not only in the bear market, but even during bull markets. Here he adds a clarification that perhaps the cycle has shifted by a couple of months, which we lost due to Trump's tariffs. Based on Ankine Analytics, it concludes that Bitcoin is in a consolidation phase before a possible breakthrough. And this has already happened in the past. An indicator showing how much the market capitalization is above or below the realized value of Bitcoin, in his opinion, is within a healthy bullish trend and is still far from overheating. Over the past 30 days, the net demand of investors has amounted to 229,000 bitcoins, which is slightly short of the previous peak of 279,000 bitcoins. Suggests that if this metric reaches a peak, the Bitcoin price may slow down a bit more before starting to rise again. It notes that this is probably why BlackRock investors sold Bitcoins for $430 million on Friday, which completed a series of consecutive purchases over 31 days. But for the entire existence, which is 17 months, $70 billion have been invested in BlackRock, Bitcoin, and TEF. Over the past month, the skits have increased their positions in Bitcoin by 3%, and in 30 days, they have redeemed 111 times more than the daily Bitcoin mission. The daily mission of Bitcoin is 450 coins. Other players, such as MicroStrategy, Metaplanet, and GameStop, are increasing their Bitcoin reserves. He also shared an insider that perhaps the Bank of England is ready to buy Bitcoin, and Brazil is already raising money for it. Some states in the US are planning to exempt Bitcoin from taxes. He also noted record sales of Japanese stocks and believes that investors can invest the released money either in American stocks, or in Bitcoin, or in gold. Depends on investors' appetite for Crisco. It also depends on him whether they will buy altcoins. Therefore, in the long run, he remains a bull, as he believes that institutional demand will exceed supply. I ended up with the risks that the new update of the Ether carries. Namely, it adds a vulnerability that can steal private keys and empty cryptocurrency wallets. It's not the most optimistic news for the Ether. CryptoLark has shared a huge catalyst for altcoins that shock him. In his opinion, this is the beginning of the era of institutional adoption of altcoins. By adding them to corporate balance sheets, launching spot altcoins and TIFs, and tokenizing real assets. According to him, this is not a hype, but a real fundamental shift that can blow up the alta market. This fundamental change, according to Lark, includes 4 points. The first point is the mass purchase of such large altcoins as Solana, Ether, and XRP by companies and institutions. Similar to how a MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin. Several public companies on Nasdaq have already begun to create a treasury based on Ether and Solana, investing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The second point: this is the upcoming approval of spot TIFs for alt Bitcoins. According to Bloomberg analysts, the probability of this is from 75 to 90%. Both single and TEFs on XP, Solana, Litecoin, and Dogecoin are expected, as well as basket and TEFs with a set of top altcoins. This could bring billions of dollars of new investments into the treasury. The third point: this is the tokenization of real assets. Bonds, gold, real estate, stocks are already switching to blockchain, especially on Ether and Avalanche. Traditional finance and banks are also actively moving in this direction. And the fourth point is the source of macroeconomic signals. That is, the future easing of the US Federal Reserve policy, a possible rate cut, and an increase in consumer confidence. According to Lark, this will create a favorable environment for the growth of the crypto market, especially risky assets like alt bitcoins. Benjamin Cohen focuses on long-term and sustainable growing trend of dominance of Bitcoin. Every time someone calls for an altcoin season, in his opinion, he does it not on the basis of facts, but because of a psychological trap. If something has been growing for too long, it is bound to fall, and Bitcoin's dominance has been growing for too long. According to Ben, this position is wrong. Altcoins in relation to Bitcoin are still below the long-term resistance, and if the previous pattern repeats, then Benjamin expects a temporary rebound, growth to the resistance line, followed by a new fall of altcoins in relation to Bitcoin to even lower levels. The base scenario after that considers the fall of the ALTA to Bitcoin to these levels. The price of Ether in relation to Bitcoin is in a giant sideways. If the return home of the previous cycles is repeated, we can see a double bottom, that is, the Ether will draw another stick down, while the rest of the viola will sink even more. Ben also sees a prolonged wave of capitulation of altcoin holders. More and more investors are giving up and transferring funds from Altos to Bitcoin. This increases the pressure on the alt and continues the growth of Bitcoin's dominance. At the same time, the bounces of alt Bitcoins remain only part of the bear market and serve simply as an exit point. While the Fed is pursuing a policy of quantitative tightening, Ben does not see a full-fledged altcoin season. And even after the reversal of this policy, another spill is possible, before the market feels the effect of the growth of cheap liquidity. In general, the market reacts to quantitative easing with some delay. Cohen makes a clear conclusion. This cycle has taught us that alt Bitcoins are a risk, not an alternative to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a bet on survival, and alt Bitcoins are a bet on risk. Bitcoins are several key alt Bitcoins, and the only ones that have survived several cycles. That's why they have, the first, survival story, second, institutional interest, third, growing acceptance, and fourth, most importantly, demand during a crisis, not just during euphoria. The main lesson Ben draws from this is that it is not the investor who took more risks who survives in the long run, but the one who held high-quality assets, understood macrocycles, and did not succumb to Thomas on short-term rebounds of the ALTA. Bitcoin is an anchor. Alt Bitcoins are waves, and not every wave comes back. It is important to keep not something that can shoot hundreds of X's, but something that can withstand time and cycles. A long-term investor is not thinking about a 100x pump, but about preserving capital. Crypto notes that Bitcoin has already shown 8 weeks of growth in a row, a record for the last 13 years. And this has not happened since 2012. Historically, such a long series of growth is usually followed by a strong correction or sideways movement. In the big picture, he notes that throughout history, Bitcoin has been moving inside a huge channel between 14-year support and resistance lines. Bear market's lows have always been at the lower boundary, and bull market's peaks have always been at the upper boundary. And right now, we are almost at the upper limit. Chris sees this similarity to the 2021 year. The main idea is that there are two possible scenarios for development. The first scenario he sees is a conservative scenario, more likely according to him. Bitcoin reaches a resistance of about $120,000, after which there is a pullback, and a strong bear market, or a big correction. And the second scenario he sees is optimistic, but less likely, because this has never happened in history. Bitcoin breaks through the 14-year resistance with a huge trading volume, which will lead to a new super cycle that has never been before and a significant increase above expectations. This could happen in the case of strong macroeconomic events, for example, related to the adoption of Bitcoin as a reserve of the largest economies in the world or simply regulation. In any case, there are two such scenarios from Crypt. Da Vinci J15, who called for buying Bitcoin for at least $1 12 years ago, is advised to keep Bitcoin and not sell it at all. In his opinion, in fact, it is worth selling it only at the moment of a complete collapse of the world monetary system. His idea is that if you need money, instead of selling Bitcoin, you can borrow money secured by Bitcoin without losing Bitcoin itself. This will allow you to use the printed money without selling off assets. According to the market situation, it is believed that the crypto market is still in a bullish phase, so the fall should be used for accumulation. In short, he sees a drop to $102,000. This is a very strong level of support, in his opinion. He also thinks that it's worth being careful now, because he sees a lot of M-shaped patterns on altcoins. These are double tops, which indicates possible further declines. Since this is a signal for a U-turn. It is better to buy on pullbacks and key support levels. Da Vinci also believes that Ethereum is stronger than Bitcoin. In his opinion, this is a year of preparation for large-scale financial changes using cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. The market may still go down, but the overall trend remains bullish, and an important strategy is to hold Bitcoin, not sell it, and if necessary use it as collateral. Crypto Crew University says that the history with Bitcoin repeats itself in each market cycle, almost exactly according to the same pattern, which is expressed by 4 candles on the annual chart, that is, each candle. That's 1 year. 4 candles. In each cycle, there is a peak candle, what Kendall calls topping, followed by exactly 1 red candle, a fall. After this red candle, there is usually a bottom candle. Kendall bots, then the Kendall breakout candle appears, which breaks through an important 3-year resistance level. And after the breakout candle, a new peak comes. The next peak candle. Then the cycle repeats again. It shows that this model was repeated in 2013, 2017, 2021, and now 2025. We are in the peak of the 4th candle of the topping cycle until 2025. This candle is very important because it can determine exactly how the market will develop in the rest of the year. If the 2025 candle can close with a large body, it will lead to a very high and impressive price level for Bitcoin. However, he does not name which one. In terms of size and structure, this candle already looks healthier and more stable compared to previous cycles, but he has doubts. Will this candle be green, or will it suddenly change the trend and turn red, which has never happened before? It's a question he can't answer. In general, in his opinion, the 2025 year can be a year of a strong breakthrough and continued growth, as well as reaching the peak of the entire cycle, if the market continues to follow the already established cycles. But the bioscript says that many people compare the current situation with the double peak of 2021, after which something like this may happen. However, he does not agree with this. He talks about market manipulation, mentioning the same wine trader who was liquidated because he publicly announced his price levels. This is his argument in favor of the fact that players such as Binance, Coinbase, market makers control the market and move the price in their favor. Whales specifically keep the market in a corridor state in order to make money on liquidations. Whales do not earn when the market is growing sharply and allows other people of ordinary retail to earn. The likely effect on the drawdown, in his opinion, had the new tariffs Trump and other macroeconomic news. He does not give financial advice, but says that he would buy on a drawdown if he had the money. They advise buying a little and averaging according to the strategy of the DC dollar cost average. He suggests saving part of the cash capital in case of further decline and, finally, gives advice to close uncomfortable positions and reduce some risks. He talks about the correlation of the Bitcoin price with the global money supply, which even seems to have prompted the recent drawdown. He notes that this drop of M2 surprisingly coincides with the completion of Trump's 90-day tariff pause, and expects a possible correction of Bitcoin in the same period, and is going to fix part of the profit on the Alta and the Q ball before that. As bullish arguments, the following are cited: spot Bitcoin TEFAs and institutional adoption, the growth of the use of stablecoins and the USSR indicator, which can lead to an increase of another 42% from the current ones, the participation of countries like the United Arab Emirates and the United Kingdom, the support of institutions like BlackRock, MicroStrategies and Trump Media, as well as the overheating of the fear and greed index, which, according to him, still leaves room for growth. In his opinion, in order for altcoins to start growing, Bitcoin must first grow significantly by itself, up to $150,000. He also believes that the growth of the capitalization of stablecoins means an increase in liquidity for altcoins. As a result, he believes that the current pullback is not a crash, but a chance. He urges not to panic, but to approach investing with the calculation of risk and potential profit. But, in his opinion, it's still worth taking the risk, because in case of risk, there is a potential reward. This is financial freedom. And if you do not take any risks at all, you will have an ordinary life, the same as most. Work, pension, and all that. In general, they believe that a possible powerful growth of cryptocurrencies awaits us ahead. Kausov Crypto thinks that altcoins are on the verge of a powerful breakthrough that will happen in the coming weeks. And most investors are completely unprepared for this. He draws an analogy with the 2021 year, when no one believed in the altcoin season. In the same way as now in the 2025. Then people became disillusioned with altcoins at the beginning of January 2021, right before the alt-Bitcoin season started, along with the decline of Bitcoin's dominance. For example, Solana, 2 weeks after the dominance of Bitcoin began to fall, increased tenfold. And by May 2021, 35 times. The disappointment of people in altcoins in the 21st 2000 was accompanied by a very rotten interest in Google Trends, just like now. But then there was a breakthrough. In his opinion, the psychology of the market repeats itself. People sell in disbelief, the market consolidates, people completely capitulate, and then a sharp growth begins, which forces retail to return to altcoins right at the peaks to become an output liquidity for those who bought on low interest. The growth of the alt-Bitcoin query in Google Trends has not yet begun, and this is a good input signal for it. As an example, he shows a graph Docs Cohen. This pattern, in his opinion, is repeated not only in Doga, but also in many other coins. What kind of pattern? It consists of 6 stages. The first one. Rally, the market is growing sharply, attracting attention. The second one. The output of smart money. The big players are taking profits. Third. Distrust and apathy begin. Retail investors lose interest, Google less, start selling as prices fall. Then comes the accumulation phase, when smart money buys again, until the majority does not believe and doubts. Which leads to the next phase in the formation of a round base. This basis shows us that buyers are getting stronger, and sellers are already running out of steam. After that, there is a breakdown and retest. The price breaks up, returns to the breakdown level for confirmation, and then a real pump begins, at which retail is already returning, at which Google Trends are already exploding. But it's too late to buy here. The same patterns are being worked out on Bitcoin. The bottom line is that distrust, low volumes, apathy are a signal not to sell, but to prepare for growth. Especially if technical signals also indicate this. He believes that it will be too late to buy when everyone has already gone crazy because of the frenzied growth, and it should be done when everyone is depressed and hates the market, when no one believes. Conclusion. Kausov Crypto says, look at how it happened with Doge before, and you will understand that a similar phase is happening now on many other altcoins. We are close to repeating the same scenario, only on the scale of the entire market. In his opinion, that is why it is important now not to listen to skeptics, and the growth of the global money supply will inevitably return confidence in the market and in the economy. Expects an increase in the total capitalization of the crypto market, excluding Bitcoin Ether, by 50 to 60%, and maybe even more. Especially, according to him, alt-Bitcoins with large capitalization can grow, because there are millions of altcoins with small capitalization and new thousands appear every day. But in the summer, there will be a correction and weakness. Cryptos. Ru expects a ban of zones in which Bitcoin can reach $150,000 in the near future. Also shares the fundamental development of the situation, good news. Talks about the big adoption of Bitcoin, for example, mentioned the creation of a new innovation fund that is tied to Bitcoin. This is the first such product that is aimed at large institutional investors. A major football club has become the largest sports organization that has included Bitcoin in its treasury reserve. Tether is actively accumulating Bitcoin and gold. GameStop has added Bitcoin to its reserve. The possibility of paying for passage through the Panama Canal with Bitcoins is being discussed. It was announced that 200,000 Bitcoins in the US reserve will not be sold. Texas and other states are also moving to create their own Bitcoin reserves. El Salvador continues to buy Bitcoin, despite the pressure of the IMF, and has already accumulated 6,190 Bitcoins. Pro-Republican politicians, including Vance and Senator Lamas, are promoting laws and courses on the crypto economy. More and more attention is being paid to Bitcoin as a defense against injustice. This, by the way, is a quote from Vance from a speech at a crypto conference in Las Vegas. And finally, the last 10th blogger in today's video, Jesse Eckel. For several months, he has been developing a model based on 55 macroeconomic and cryptocurrency metrics in order to predict the beginning of a new altcoin season. As a result, he came to the conclusion that the alt season. This is not an accident, but the result of macroeconomic conditions that contribute to the growth of risky assets. Here are his key points. The first one. Altcoin season occurs when 3 key conditions coincide. High liquidity in the system, IDS a lot of fuel, cheap loans. and cheap money, which enhances liquidity. And investors have an increased appetite for risk, a willingness to take risks and lose. And when money becomes cheaper, investors can afford higher risks. The second thesis. Historically, altcoin seasons were in the 2013th, 17th, and 21st, when all these conditions coincided. But there have been no such conditions since the 21st 2000, so the Alta market remains quite dead. The third thesis. Now the situation is starting to change. Threads in Bitcoin and Typhoid and Growth Stableem say that fuel the cryptocurrency market accumulate. However, the overall macro liquidity is not yet at the right level. The Fed is still conducting quantitative tightening, the US Treasury is pulling liquidity, and production remains weak. His model shows that the conditions are close to the right ones, but have not yet matured. The fourth thesis. He draws an analogy with a forest fire. Alt season. This is not magic, but a fire that breaks out when the forest is dry. This is liquidity in a strong wind. These are cheap loans and a crowd of people with gasoline. These are investors with the syndrome of lost profits. Why are these theses important? When the alt season becomes obvious, it's too late to enter. The crowd is already in the market. The fire has already broken out. And entering the flame means only one thing. You're going to burn. Real money is earned on early entry, when the model is just beginning to signal a potential rocket launch. In the long term, he considers global debt to be the main driver of the crypto market and altcoins. It is he who forces the authorities to turn on the printing press, which fuels the cycles again and again. As a result, he believes that the world is on the threshold of a new alt season, but not right now. But when all these three conditions converge at one point, he prepares his altcoin portfolio in advance, while the majority is still in doubt, and is going to sell when the majority runs to buy. That's it, and see you in new videos. See you soon.